Welcome to Why Not Read Alpha Flight with Chris and Tom, a podcast where we take your favorite series seriously. I'm Chris Baker.
And I'm Tom Flynn, and welcome to episode 13, where we return to the Alpha Flight series proper.
And on the topic of housekeeping, holy hell does John Byrne scour the place. Seriously, there are more words in this first issue than we will use to describe it to you.
So much talking. Like, good talking, but the 80s comics just hit different, you know? We've got 2 issues of Alpha Flight for you today, loyal listeners, and while they aren't quite an arc in their own right, they do get us out of our transition period and into the next phase of Alpha Flight.
The story so far. After the death of team leader and founder James McDonald Hudson, aka Mac, his widow Heather is left riddled with guilt and rudderless, and the team somewhat scattered to their own affairs. While in Toronto with Puck, Heather bravely dove into Lake Ontario trying to save a baby from an alien monster, and failing, and suffered severe lacerations on her legs. She's recuperating in the hospital, where her old pal Logan, aka Wolverine, snuck back into Canada to check in on her.
Before we continue, Chris, a quick side note that just occurred to me. Is Heather, like, the ultimate Alphan?
Yes. That's literally what the rest of Alpha Flight Volume 1, actually all of Alpha Flight is that she is the glue that holds the whole thing together.
Well, I'm also thinking just in terms of, like, sex, death, failure, and team-ups.
Okay, now I see what you mean. And yes, you are 100% correct. She embodies the core Alpha Flight values of sex, death, team-ups, and failures.
Fantastic.
I see that you have picked up on this. Excellent. Where were we?
You've deeply infected me with this thing. Sarcy Medicine Man Shaman has just been reunited with his long-estranged and very rude young adult daughter Elizabeth, but only for official shaman business, not for family stuff.
Half-god, half-human shapeshifter Snowbird, a.k.a. Narya, a.k.a. Anne Mackenzie, has gone back to the Northwest Territory to explore her human side with her former co-worker at the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the love-struck Doug Thompson. Aurora and Northstar, a.k.a. Jean-Marie and Jean-Paul Beaubier, are still pissy about their fight and breakup all the way back in Alpha Flight number 8. Aurora has been having trouble containing Jean-Marie inside her head and seems to be taking steps to assert her ownership of the body. And let's not also forget their tiff during their team-up with Spider-Man.
Secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski, once again, Chris has capitalized that K, and it's just not happening. Walt has been noticeably MIA for a few issues, except, of course, for last episode where we got to see him absolutely wild out trying to kill Northstar, which you can't. This is the first time I'm going to say it. I don't blame Walt. He was justified there.
Hashtag Walt was right.
And finally, after the events of Marvel Team Up number 7, which, man, we keep bringing it up, but it was just fun. I really did enjoy that a lot. Or possibly Alpha Flight number 16. Young Marina has, once again, swum away to brood about, and that's a deliberate word choice given how often broodmate has been brought up in relation to her. Ugh. She swam away to brood about how she's an alien sea monster that no one understands, and that's where we're at. Now let's take it away.
Alpha Flight number 17, titled Dreams Die Hard, cover date December 1984. John Byrne is credited as creator/chronicler. Colored by Andy Yanchus, lettered by Joe Rosen, edited by Denny O'Neil with Jim Shooter as editor-in-chief, and some credits to Chris Claremont and Terry Austin for some pages that get reprinted for their work on X-Men. Ooh, that's exciting, Tom.
Well, boy, howdy, do we have some X-Men. The cover takes us all the way back to the not uncanny X-Men number 109, where Weapon Alpha, aka Vindicator, aka JMH, is fighting the X-Men to take Wolverine back home. This cover picked the 2 seconds of this fight that shows Weapon Alpha looking like he could win, and 2 seconds might be a bit generous there. If this fight follows the original fight scene, the blast he's delivering to Colossus is going to wound nearby Moira McTaggart, causing Vindicator to get his ass absolutely kicked by Banshee, of all people. Don't piss off an Irishman. It is kind of an odd choice to have Mac on the cover of number 17 here, since he did die back in number 12.
Yeah, Weekend at Byrne Mac's appearances through Alpha Flight is going to become kind of a theme here. But, just to drive home that point of Mac coming back and all that, the issue opens with this full-page pinup of James McDonald Hudson, dressed in the Weapon Alpha costume, saying, "Well, how do I look?" With narration from his wife Heather saying, "He looked great, and I had to say so."
I do, before we move on, quickly want to note that they're in his office 500 feet beneath Parliament Hill, and there's a window with blinds drawn in his office as if he opened them, he'd be looking out onto a car park or something.
I've been thinking about this since you brought it up. The reason they do that is because Department H's incredibly top-tier psychologists have decided that they need to have that normality of feeling like they're not 500 feet below Parliament Hill. And so they put in some of these cosmetic touches for psychological health reasons, because Department H really cares about the mental health of their employees. Could you hear me over my tongue being in my cheek?
Oh, I could totally hear you.
It is nice to see Mac again. I'm not going to lie. Like, he cuts a fine figure. He was such a part of the first story. It was great. But what's weird is he's smiling, and nothing ever good comes from a flashback of a dead character smiling, does it?
In this scene, Heather is apparently seeing the Weapon Alpha suit for the first time, and for narrative convenience, this happens the same day Wolverine stormed away from Department H with Professor Xavier. One quick note, there's a coloring error on page 2 where Weapon Alpha's neck is flesh-covered instead of white, like it should be, and it's really jarring. Like, he looks like Iron Fist more than Guardian here.
That's what I thought too!
This is the first time we've noticed a coloring error this glaring from Andy Yanchus. Come on, Andy. Get it right or pay the price.
Oh, Tom, I regret to inform you that Andy is no longer in a position to get anything right or wrong, if you get my meaning.
Ugh, I had to say pay the price.
Oh, he has. Why are we back at the beginning of Alpha Flight when Heather is actually in the hospital talking to Wolverine while recuperating from her wounds? Well, they're filling each other in on each other's side of the story that the other doesn't know about. So there's lots of flashbacks here, some new and some directly reprinted from the original issue. I thought that this scene, there was an incredible intimacy here between Heather and Logan. And I know that we and comics readers at large make a lot of jokes about the Heather Mac Logan throuple. And honestly, I think that the love that they shared is really apparent here.
Heather tells Wolverine how hurt Mac was when Wolverine left without even saying goodbye. Wolverine confesses to Heather that Mac was his best friend.
And Heather says, "We did love you, Logan. Mac and I both, as much as any parents could love a child. You're older than both of us, yet that's what you seemed, our child. A child desperately in need of the love we had to offer." Okay, you know what? That got a little weird. But I stand by what I said. Moving on.
Yeah, moving on. Wolverine tells Heather what he was up to with the X-Men between Giant Size X-Men number 1 and X-Men issues number 94 and 109 when Mac showed up to take him home, which we will skip because nothing important happened at all. I mean, among other things, Krakoa and the original Phoenix saga happened in that 15-ish issue span. This smoothly segues into some reprint panels from those X-Men issues. One page you're reading Wolverine's narration written and drawn by Byrne, then with a page flip, you're in original Terry Austin panels with Chris Claremont dialogue, then back to John Byrne's panels of Heather telling Logan what Mac was doing at the same time.
It's a very cool effect that they used here. It does not feel like it's lazy or like a shortcut. If anything, it probably took more thought to make these scenes flow like this than just redrawing the scenes would have been. And I can see exactly how this would have been handled in 1998, redrawn quickly and then digitally recolored. It'd be horrible. It also does highlight how different Wolverine is now than he was then. And not just visually, but also with the dialogue, because you got different people writing him, different people drawing him, and it's a really cool feeling of time progressing. And that is so different than the constant continuity resets that 90s readers got used to later on.
For a flashback issue that doesn't really do a lot to speed the plot ahead, this is a damn good issue for anyone who started following Alpha Flight at issue 1 or got into it when they heard about Mac's death. I also think this is why Chronicler may have been used here. I mean, look, Chronicler may have been used because Byrne just felt like being called Chronicler for this issue, which is fine. But this issue also feels like something very different from your standard superhero comic. There's a tone to it that is of two old friends reconnecting over shared grief, of something larger that happened being discussed. I don't know. I almost wonder if Alpha Flight had been more of a series of mini-series, what could have been.
Apparently, Byrne, when he was talked into doing the book because he didn't want to, had the first 12 planned out and then got the idea for the Marina and Master story and did that one. And then just kind of kept coming up with these ideas about what he wanted to do with a character. And that's why we're not so much getting arcs here, but we're getting sort of like a couple of issues of somebody doing something and then a few pieces getting laid down to build on later. And we're hitting the point in Byrne's run where he's kind of stringing it together, but also running out of the stuff that he really wants to say about these characters. So now those of you who have been listening to us from the beginning might remember me putting a pin in this first fight between Weapon Alpha and Wolverine. In Mac's first appearance, he was incredibly cocky and spoiling for a fight with none of the character development that Byrne has done since then, and this flashback shows us why. Mac intentionally is trying to goad Wolverine into a berserker rage and not think through his attacks. So now, Byrne has explained away both Mac's weird motivations as well as why he bursts from the ground so awkwardly, which is because his suit was originally designed for mining. I love that Byrne has taken, 30 issues of time to explain this stuff from the very first appearance. Thanks, John.
And I've been thinking about that. A guy flying through the ground has got to make noise or at least cause some pretty serious vibrations. So how in the world does that move not only take Wolverine by surprise, but also, I mean, the deer he was hunting did scatter first, but its senses aren't going to be much better than Wolverine's, so I feel like they should have sensed him from half a mile away, but, you know.
Tom, to paraphrase the great Harrison Ford, it ain't that kind of comic, kid. So a lot of reprinted panels follow, but before we leave the flashback scene, there is one thing I noticed. When Cody told Mac that Logan had left, because we're back in, we're moving back through these flashbacks weird, but going back to when Heather and Mac are in his office. When Cody tells Mac that Logan had left, he called Logan Weapon X, and I didn't recall having been mentioned before, and so I tripped down a rabbit hole, and apparently it was mentioned all the way back in Wolverine's first appearance in Incredible Hulk number 181, but it does not seem to have been brought up again since then. And with the caveat here that I didn't read through all the X-Men that Wolverine was in, but as far as the Alpha Flight perspective is, we heard Weapon X all the way back when he first showed up, and then we heard Weapon X here. That's it. And if I'm wrong, please let us know on a blog post at www.thewhynotpod.com. Thanks.
After the classic Weapon X storyline, it becomes readily apparent there isn't a book Bible explanation of who the project reported to, who ran it, who continued running it. It's a goddamn mess. It's a brand name anyone can pick up and run with, apparently.
I do find it interesting that we only get this treatment for the first time Mac came for Logan. I really would have preferred fewer reprint panels and more background on that second meeting at the Calgary Stampede when he brought Sasquatch and wrecked their jet and all that.
The reprint panels do let us revisit one of our favorite early Alpha Flight moments when Colossus decides his opening move against an unknown opponent is attempted murder.
In the Marvel Overpower card game, Colossus had a special attack card called Haymaker that gave him a 7 fighting attack that could be modified with weapons, and it was an incredible surprise attack from a strength-based character. And anyway, I tell you that story to tell you this one. That attack ought to be called the Jelly Maker instead of the Haymaker, because he tried to make jelly out of Weapon Alpha without knowing that he could take it. And listeners, I looked it up this time. Colossus doesn't kill Proteus until X-Men number 128, so this is well before he got a taste for blood.
And for those of you who don't know Colossus, he is absolutely wrecked by killing a kid and is generally not one to, seek violence. And yet,
he will always do what he has to do as a member of the Gotta Get Punched by the Hulk Club.
Also worth mentioning that Mac's narration as he's fighting Wolverine, he's genuinely concerned that his force fields won't be able to stand up to Wolverine, and that he's just not going to be strong enough to take him out. And Wolverine thinks to himself, man, that punch almost took me down. Apparently, Max should have been much more concerned about whether or not his force fields could stand up to a steel man punching him with all his might.
And I'm going to float a theory here. Back when Wolverine popped up into Heather's apartment after years of being away and says, "Hey, sexy," and she jumps up and says, "Oh, Wolverine, you're not here to fight Mac again, are you?" I'm wondering if there's a totally different intonation where she's actually hopeful and excited that she gets to watch it this time. And she says, "Oh, you're not here to fight Mac again, are you?" Upward vocal fry.
You are really never going to leave this throuple thing go.
They all love each other, and love takes a lot of forms, Tom. Back in the hospital in 1985, well, yeah, 85. And amid some great exchanges between them, Logan tells Heather that Mac had a crazy dream of making this world a better place than it is. So I guess that's the dream that they referenced back in issue number 1. It falls pretty flat.
As far as dreams go, it's okay, I guess. But at the same time, the logistics behind executing that dream are clearly almost impossible, if not incredibly poorly thought out, which is very on brand for Mac. Like, logistics were not his thing.
You know, I have nothing to say to that. You're right. Puck arrives, and he and Wolverine, despite apparently having run in the same circles for years, meet face to face for the first time. And it is odd to see Wolverine shaking hands with someone and looking down for a change.
Byrne definitely has his character set in his head as to what their relative relationships are to each other in size, which is something that kind of disappears a bit in the 90s ever so slightly, especially with Wolverine. I feel like he gets a little, in a group shot, you can tell he's smaller than the others, but as soon as he's talking to someone, it's basically
looms.
eye level.
Yeah.
And that's just not right. But anyway, Puck and Wolverine together convince Heather to be the new leader of Alpha Flight.
It's a bit of a leap, but it isn't crazy either. Like you said earlier, she is the ultimate alphan, right? It's not like we're dealing with a government-sponsored team or anything, so it's not like somebody's got to keep track of the phone tree to know when to reach people and how, and time off and all that stuff. And it's not like Mac was doing it before. Maybe Heather was doing like half of Mac's admin work without ever telling anybody. I would totally buy that if they slipped that into the book.
Well, and considering how the first Alpha Flight adventure, like, proper kicks off, where she's the one that has to pop into the machine and send out the call. Mac didn't do it. Mac hardly ever sent. The one time I think Mac sent out the call was right before he died. So, just saying.
And she has very clearly been written to be this character who is vital to the team and yet not part of it. And I think that dynamic is super cool. And we lose a really neat thing as she moves into being a superhero on her own. It's kind of cool when she's just running around with a gun on her hip as a human and telling the superhumans what to do. I kind of like that era.
I also just want to quickly note before we move on to the rest of the issue, Chris, that me referring to her as an Alphan may have been the nicest thing I've ever done for you.
And you did it without thinking about it because you're one of us. One of us.
But that's not all. We finally checked back in with our friend, secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski. He is back in British Columbia at Simon Fraser University, where he is conducting a personal project with the university's equipment because, that's just how Walt rolls.
That's literally everything we've ever been told about Walt's scientific, skills or experience is just conducting personal experiments on the body of himself and his lover.
On which note, we get a great nude but strategically covered shot of Aurora in some kind of water tube tank thing. We last saw Aurora in Walt's condo having a prolonged breakdown with her Jean-Marie persona and vowing to find a way to lock away Jean-Marie while threatening her hair with a pair of scissors. I mean, she might have been threatening her hair with a pair of scissors, but she was promising Walt a good time. You can immediately see that her previously long and voluminous hair is very short now, but the water goo in the tank and the face mask she is wearing help to hide it till the big reveal next issue.
Okay, and look, the viewer is generally not looking at her hair in this panel. I really think that Byrne got a little bored with all the talky seriousness of the rest of the issue and just decided to sex it up a bit for the last few pages.
Sex sells, Gwen. Sex sells.
They briefly reassure each other to proceed. Walt activates a machine, Aurora cries out in pain, and breaks the tank. So, look, to catch you up, in addition to this Jean-Marie stuff, Aurora's other ongoing plot point is her messy breakup with twin brother Northstar, aka Jean-Paul. We haven't seen it since, I think, issue 4, but they have a shared mutant power that when they touch each other, they release an overwhelming flash of light. It seems that Walt has applied some sort of, quote, molecular realignment, end quote, to Aurora to break Aurora's powers away from Northstar's, allowing her to be fully powered without ever having to touch him. But it's really poorly explained in this scene. For all the words spilled in this issue, a couple dozen more here would have been really appreciated.
As Aurora goes to get dressed, Walt thinks, and it's probably worth quoting at length here, Aurora is a mutant, born with a strange kink in her DNA.
Okay, look, that threw me. Yeah, I'm utterly positive she's got at least one strange kink, but I'm not talking about the DNA kind. Anyway, back to the quote.
A strange kink in her DNA that gives her the ability to fly at nearly light speed. But mutants never had an easy go of it. Anti-mutant sentiment seems to rise and fall like fashions and hemlines, and right now it's on the rise again. People, human beings, Homo sapiens, fear mutants as the worst conceivable wolf in the fold, because any child could be a mutant. As long as some mutants insist on styling themselves as Homo superior and threatening eventual domination of the Earth, I guess people have a right to be afraid. But I care about Aurora, and that gives me the right to try to protect her. And if this worked, she won't be a mutant anymore. She'll still have a version of her power, but to any detection device, holy cow!
Walt is startled by Aurora's return. We only see her hip and arm, but instead of the black and white speed skating suit of her old uniform, we see yellow and white hot pants with a sleeve with spiky bits reminiscent of the pattern of her old costume. I bet you that there's some odd orange fringe, and that's what freaked him out. What?
There was some leftover material from his last quilting project left around.
Oh, Jesus Christ, that's what you meant. Oh, ew. So that's where the issue ends, with lots of stuff coming with Aurora, but I want to circle back to Walt's thoughts on mutants for a minute. And I've tried to write this, and boy, I don't know how to do this, Tom. What do you think?
I got a lot of thoughts. I also wasn't expecting you the one to read the quote, because I really didn't want to read that quote.
Well, it wasn't Sasquatch saying it, so I couldn't do the voice.
Maybe we should do a version where you do it as Sasquatch.
No, we have to maintain the Walt Sasquatch split.
That would be a terrible idea.
So, look, there's both sidesism. There's the paternalism of trying to save one of the good ones, and the fact that because he cares about Aurora, he'll do something to help her, but fuck the rest of the mutants. Am I right?
It's wild. There's both sidesism, and then there's whatever the hell this shit is. Like,
yeah, we talked about Walt getting carried like a baby into a battle by his girlfriend as being practically woke. Yeah, this is the opposite of that.
There's a way in which this very much fits in with my general thoughts about Walt. This is...
That was very polite, Tom.
It was as polite as I can make it. This is a guy who was, as we've gone over at length before, was a professional football player, was good enough at science to be able to...
Yeah, it's right there in his name. Secret agent superhero linebacker Dr. Walter Langowski.
This is a dude who's had a lot of his life served up to him on a silver platter. Not that he didn't have to work hard for some of it, but like... You're not struggling if you're playing pro football and then becoming a superhero and a secret agent and all that. You're just not. And as evidenced by his wife leaving him and taking the kid with, like he comes across as a pretty selfish dude. And once again, he is deploying his talents to make his life easier. Now, if everything went well, he doesn't have to
get what he wants, not just to make it easier, to get what he wants. He wanted to be big and superpowered, biggest and baddest, and now he wants a girlfriend without that weird-ass brother sniffing around and being all weird-ass about it.
Or having to worry about dealing with racism towards her. Like, he basically here, he is trying to force her to pass without giving her any option in the matter.
Wow. Well, no. I mean, she's choosing to do this.
But
like, she wants to do this,
but
too.
He didn't...
But she wants it just to get away from Northstar. And he's looking at this from this whole other thing about making her pass and fitting her into the mold of what he thinks is going to fit into his life.
Well, but that's what I mean by, like, not giving her the choice on passing. She wants her powers to be altered such that she doesn't have to, like... I mean, and also this is a little unclear to me. She can fly without Northstar. So, like, is this just so she can generate a bright flash of light without him? I mean, that's the or because when they come in, I don't know. That part's a little.
I think it's a lot about Walt taking ownership of her body.
Well, and this is the point.
There's so much wrapped up into these pages.
Did he tell her? And I don't think he did. I doubt Walt would. Did he tell her that I'm going to alter your powers, but in so doing, you'll no longer register as a mutant? Because on some level, I don't know that Aurora would care on that particular point.
I bet she doesn't care about that.
But he doesn't get to make that choice for her. And
they come together. If she wants to have her powers separated, it comes at the cost of her somehow not being a mutant. So now here's the part I want to get at. So she still has all of her superpowers, but she doesn't show up as a mutant, and yet that makes it okay for her to have superpowers. Kind of like how it's okay for Spider-Man to have mutant powers. or to have powers, and it's okay for the Fantastic Four to have powers because they're not mutants. But once it's a mutant, just like he said, every parent's worst fear. Why? It's just I don't get what's going on here, but apparently Walt is caught up in the mess that is the mutant hysteria of the 80s.
Well, yeah, and I mean, it's basic racism, right? Like, I mean, it fundamentally is, right? Like, what is the difference between...
Yeah, that is very much how this read. You're absolutely right, Tom, that this is him saying, like, oh my God, my kid could be black and I never knew it.
Right. I mean, like, I think there was this distinction drawn in, well, maybe it was the Earth X comics between, like, a mutant and a mutate or something like that. And Spider-Man was a mutate because, like, he got his powers later. He wasn't born. His DNA didn't immediately, like, generate, whatever. But again...
So why does that make it okay?
But why does that matter, ultimately, right? This is Walt, who, let's keep in mind, is part of a superhero team, is himself an empowered being, making a decision as to what he is personally comfortable with dealing with in his life and for the people around him, and altering their bodies in order to accomplish that, hiding them away because he's big, strong Sasquatch and he can't stand up to society hating mutants.
Okay, yeah, and okay. Final point on this, because I think you segued into the last thing I wanted to say. All of what we just said, all of this problematic stuff here, all of this comes from a dude who spent years and his fortune turning himself into a giant Sasquatch. Why in the world should I be more afraid of someone who is born with their superpower and has no say over getting it, as opposed to a weirdo who goes out of his way to ruin his family and give himself superpowers that render him accountable to no one but the Hulk? And Colossus, I guess. The Thing never beat him, but he wasn't beaten by him either, so maybe the Thing. We'll put the Thing in there. Accountable to 3 people on Earth.
I mean, I gotta tell you, folks, I was right.
Hashtag Tom was right.
Hashtag...
Oh, wait, no. That hashtag is actually in use. Moving on.
I don't want to know about that.
So, Walt's just a dude. He's driven and brilliant, but he is just a dude. He's like Reed Richards from Wish, Tom.
I think you're impugning dude there, but we can move on.
Okay. Well, that was a whole lot about a single issue, but it's a damn meaty issue, and I had a fun with it.
Moving right along, Alpha Flight number 18, titled How Long Will a Man Lie in the Earth Ere He Rot? Cover date, January 1985. Written and penciled, not chronicled, by John Byrne, inked by Bob Wiacek, colored by Andy Yanchus, lettered by Rick Parker, edited by Denny O'Neil, with Jim Shooter as editor-in-chief.
First thing first, on the cover, we have our first change to the Alpha Flight cover logo. No more serif font angled logo. We now have smooth mid-80s lines that look like an airline logo, or like a Disney hotel logo from that time. I like it.
The original logo will come back in 1992 as the Volume 1 enters its final years, but this 1985 design is going to appear on 90 issues or so of Alpha Flight, compared to the traditional's meager 40 issues across Volume 1.
And for those curious, what I've looked at up to about 2011, subsequent volumes will look much more like this 1985 design with the smooth lines and the sans serif font than they will the original. The modern revival in 2023 uses the original logo.
But there's other things going on this cover as well. It is split into 3 panels with angled lines that look like glass fractures. In one panel, Heather is looking at herself in the mirror while holding Guardian's suit to herself, with the caption, "A new role for Heather."
In another, the caption, "A decision for Snowbird," with Snowbird and her gentleman friend Doug Thompson near kissing.
And finally, the caption, "And Shaman meets the ultimate menace," with a shocked Shaman looking at a slim, evil-looking silhouette figure with long, flowing hair.
The split cover is new and different to this book. It looks very soap opera. In fact, I heard these narration boxes in William Dozier's voice.
I don't know who that is.
Oh, yes, you do. He was the narrator in the original 1966 Batman TV show.
Okay, now I hear it.
A new role for Heather. A decision for Snowbird. And Shaman meets the ultimate menace.
This issue opens with a scene of Heather, now out of the hospital and in Puck's shabby Toronto apartment, holding up Guardian's costume to herself in the full-length mirror. This is a bait and switch. With the non-superpowered Heather agreeing to take on the mantle of leader of Alpha Flight, it's absolutely natural to wonder if she will pull out a spare power suit of Max and use it to lead the team in the field.
However, she won't be doing that, at least while John Byrne is on the book. His intention was for her to lead the team completely as a human, while Matt Lowe puts her in the suit in, his second issue. And anyway, this is not the actual powered part of Guardian's suit, but instead it's just like the spandex sock that goes over it. We saw hints of that dynamic back when Guardian died, seeing the shredded cloth with circuitry underneath.
Now it's time to put the band back together. Heather starts by calling Northstar, of all people.
Yeah, why would you start? They're looking at the list of names, and she's like, well, let's just get this over with. Fuck.
Clearly. The phone is answered poolside by a young man in very small swim trunks who hands the phone to Northstar saying, Jean-Paul, telephone, it's Heather Hudson.
With the apostrophes instead of the H's.
And also with a note saying translated from the French. Which is actually really delightful because Heather apologizes to Northstar for her French as she's trying to get the dude back on the team and is going to the effort of speaking French to him. And his response is to tell her to go pound sand. The only reason he was
did we expect anything else, really?
The only reason he was a part of this was to be with his sister. His sister's no longer part of it, so everyone else can just pretty much piss off, and he's going to continue to lay in his pool on his floating device while his...
I so thought you were going to say on his young man in very small swim trunks.
I was about to bring in the young man in the small swim trunks, but hey, small swim trunks are back, so let's not go overboard with this.
Listeners, Tom once had me embroider a small Loki alligator icon on a pair of swim trunks for him. Like the from the Loki series, and it looks like the Lacoste alligator. Apparently, he cuts quite the figure at the local pool. Next up, we call Shaman, who is not able to come to the phone right now because he's off with a young woman who barged into his office asking for Shaman, which freaks Puck and Heather right out because he is not out as a superhero. Back in Alpha Flight number 15, we met college student Elizabeth Twoyoungmen working on an archaeological dig when she uncovered a white man's skull that erupted in magical pyrotechnics while shouting, "Revenge!" I gotta say, if a skull is gonna pop out of the ground in Canada shouting revenge, probably don't expect it to be a white guy's skull.
Well,
anyway.
And also, on that point, once Shaman gets to the scene, it's kind of hard for him to figure out what's going on, because again, a skull being unearthed in Canada coming out screaming revenge, not very specific. There's a lot of things to again, back to the whole Vindicator bit. There's a lot of things going on there. But it also, just to note, it turns out that in this issue that the dig is connected to the founding of Calgary 100 years before. That matters because of a character we're about to meet. Realizing this was magic, Elizabeth ran off to find her father Michael, whom she has not seen for over 10 years since her mother died, and she, being a small child, blamed Michael for not having saved her and ran off to live with her neighbors, coincidentally the parents of one Heather McNeil Hudson, who had been Elizabeth's babysitter in her youth. Also to note, while she was a small child blaming her father, he did then disappear for 10 years.
Okay, look, yes, he disappeared for 10 years. Did the McNeils ever reach out to him? Did they ever call him? Did they ever be like, hey, so Michael, this kid that you left here, am I enrolling her in school now? What's the plan here, Mike?
I think it's totally reasonable to assume that the McNeils did do that, and he still didn't come back. So whatever, from her perspective, he failed to save her mom, and then he took off. So she basically lost both parents, one by choice. So she has every right to dislike Michael.
She is a very hurt child.
Yes.
And this is going to be a lot of what drives her, even though it's not necessarily put on the page as much as I would like. Like, they don't talk about this for 70 issues or something. It is insane how long this stuff just goes unstated between the two of them.
It's also interesting because, look, we have a very high opinion of Michael. It's even suggested by Heather in a flashback in the previous issue that she would be much more comfortable if it was Logan or Michael as the team leader. And there's Mac explains why it can't be Michael. But look, Michael Twoyoungmen, Shaman, is an upstanding guy who does really good stuff. The biggest failing of his life is not losing his wife. It's not being able to save her. The biggest failing of his life is abandoning his daughter. And I can totally see him having a very hard time addressing that. Doesn't mean...
Yeah, he's not really a Fifi guy.
That's not an excuse, but it makes sense with the character. But back to the issue. Inspecting the dig site, Shaman tells Elizabeth that there is something special about her, and that is why the skull spoke to her, and no one else at the site saw it as it exploded away from the image exploded away from the skull.
So the two Twoyoungmen, the Twoyoungmen, liaise with the local police and head to the cop shop, that's what the book calls it, to wait for something magical to happen. I guess like the kid in The Incredibles waiting for something incredible to happen.
This also kind of answers questions that we've raised in the past regarding knowledge of Alpha Flight, as the inspector at the site is doing everything Shaman says because the local police chief remembers Alpha Flight tangling with the X-Men. So yeah, not very clandestine, and also the X-Men are a known quantity at this point?
Well, you know, we're in Calgary. It's the Calgary Stampede. There was a fight in Calgary, but I don't know who would have known. There's probably like 2 guards or something who were watching this happen, and it's like an urban legend, like how the government controls hurricanes type of thing.
I love the idea of the 2 guards just like calmly eating popcorn while watching like Nightcrawler and Aurora play tag around the Stampede. That's pretty great.
They send the new guy out for poutine.
Oh, so much. Can you do poutine?
And he gets back and the whole thing's over. He's like, what'd I miss, guys?
Can you imagine poutine on popcorn? That doesn't sound terrible, actually.
You know, I really would like to try some French fries and gravy, sir. Scene change. In a large old house, we meet Mr. Stang, which it makes me think of Tony Stank from the end credit scene of, I think it was Civil War. But yeah, anyway, Mr. Stang, a very old man, like 117 years old, who is very ready to depart this world, much to the annoyance of his battle axe of a nurse insisting that he take his medicine.
Said nurse was hired by Stang's great-granddaughter, a beautiful young blonde woman who has only recently reconnected with Stang and is trying to take care of him since he won't take care of himself. He asks her, "Why, great-granddaughter? Why did you seek me out after all this time, knowing how your father hated me, knowing how I have systematically destroyed everyone who ever loved me?"
Tom? Okay, look. You freaked out when I pulled out Sasquatch Shoresy voice. You have no room to give me shit anymore because that was a fantastic, bruv.
Oh,
I'm going to go rewrite the script so that I have more quotes from this guy. Jesus. You can't waste a voice like that.
dude, I just decided to do it in the moment.
Sorry. All right, I'm collecting myself. She replies, "I don't really know, great-grandfather. I really don't. Something told me you might need someone like me, someone who demands nothing of you and loves you for what you are, not despite it. You know, I don't know if I have ever seen a slate as blank as this great-granddaughter."
She heads to the kitchen to make some scrambled eggs. And while I have issues with how she does this isn't a scrambled egg podcast, but no, like, my God. Like, it's a war crime, okay? I'm not even going to describe it, because you know what? If you're so interested, go watch that yourself. Inflict that upon your own eyes. Jesus. As she narrates some backstory about her family to herself in the kitchen and turns her back on the stove, the eggs begin growing out of the pan, and she gasps in surprise. But I mean, shit, that might be part of her method as far as I'm concerned. Cut to Shaman and Elizabeth hanging out at the cop shop, and the detective bursts in saying, "I think we got a live one, Shaman. Lucas Stang, his great-granddaughter, just called us up in a major panic. Something about her scrambled eggs attacking her?"
And Shaman practically sighs as he stands up and says, "Well, time to make the Timbits." But not really. He tries to leave Elizabeth behind, and she straight up blackmails him to bring her along. So he scatters his magic powder around them, and they appear at the Stang mansion.
Okay, last interlude before we ride the rails of the Stang story into the next couple issues. Snowbird is meeting up with her friend, Doug Thompson, who we last saw, declaring his love for her.
She says to him, "I fear I cannot return that love. I wish I could, but I have not the means." Does that mean that she doesn't have but she's a shapeshifter, can't she just... Wait, does this mean that any animal she changes into doesn't have, help?
Moving right along. Doug insists this won't be a problem and kisses her, whereupon Snowbird initially leans in, but then pulls away saying, "Douglas, you do not know what you do. I do love you. I cannot deny it now. but I am not what I seem, sweet Douglas. As I may wear the shape of any Arctic creature at my will, so too is this form a construct, an imaginary shape.
As she speaks, half her face falls into shadow, the black sclera losing their usual white iris and turning her eyes fully red. As her face fully darkens, she says, "Look upon my true face, Douglas Thompson. Look upon the true face of Naria, daughter of Nelvan, granddaughter of Hodiak, and speak to me then of love."
She goes from a pretty, even delicate and soft woman to a dark and terrifying creature beyond comprehension.
Kind of like Galadriel during the Dark Queen speech in Lord of the Rings.
Actually, very much like that.
We will pick up with these crazy kids in a later episode. For now, it's back to the Stang house and Shaman casually strolling up and ringing the doorbell, where the granddaughter, eventually named Emily, lets them in and shows them to the kitchen. Shaman opens the door, and a giant goddamn scrambled egg monster has filled the kitchen and tries to eat Shaman.
Quickly ascertaining that the magic egg monster is pulling energy from somewhere to create its mass, Shaman casts a spell to make the monster pull its energy from inside his magic medicine bag so he can modulate the energy, causing the monster to destabilize into an immense explosion hundreds of feet high. And yet, in the next scene, not only is the house intact, but everything inside is exactly as it was before the scrambled egg monster appeared.
Shaman has a "that was too easy" moment and realizes this was merely a distraction. When Emily says Stang is still in the house, Shaman puts on his angry daddy pants and says, "Shit I could have known about like 3 minutes ago, lady." But not really. They rush up to great-grandfather's room and find him sitting in an all-white magical space that is not the lovely mansion they were just in.
Stang rambles about how he has sealed himself away from humanity because the ancient evils are coming home to roost, to strike at him through those he loves, and to avoid that he must kill Emily so that Stang himself can die at a time of his own choosing, not this unnamed evil entity's choosing.
Okay, that was some muddled plot drop that Byrne gave us there, but that's how it played out. So we'll be finding out more about this later, but we get a hint here that Stang is just an asshole, and he deserves to be alone. Emily then changes into a truly monstrous creature and magically attacks Elizabeth, who is able to catch the magical energy and use it to strike back against the Emily monster. Shaman marvels at Elizabeth's natural ability to harness magic without any study like he had to do, saying her abilities are somehow instinctive, almost at the level of a genetic mutation.
Wait. Are they suggesting?
We'll get to that. Recognizing Emily is possessed by the great beast Rannoch, the Great Destroyer, Shaman waits for his chance to help Elizabeth, who is doing a good job of holding her own here despite literally not knowing what's going on. That is going to be Elizabeth's deal for a long time.
Eventually, Shaman sees his chance and pulls some baubles from his bag and throws them at the Rannoch creature. And when they touch him, her, whatever's going on there, the next panel goes blank white with the caption, "Just for a single wrenching moment, the universe itself seems to blink out of existence, like a soap bubble suddenly impaled on a thorn."
Now, and the way that the baubles fly through the air, I really got the impression that they moved in a way that was eerie. They looked like they had mass to them, and if he threw them, your monkey brain can extrapolate the trajectory and the force and whatnot and figure out where they're going to go. But it seemed like they moved magically across the space and had to kind of sneak up on the Rannoch creature. There was just a neat little bit of subtlety there, and then when reality pops out, it made his magic feel eerie in a way that I never get from Doctor Strange, where it's all very showy about what it is.
Well, and on that note, this time the house definitely took damage because Shaman and Elizabeth are looking through the blown-out wall. Emily and Stang are alive but unconscious. Elizabeth, being new to the superhero life, is confused that she went from magically fighting for her life to 5 seconds later everything seeming normal again. Which is a valid point. No great denouement, no pomp and circumstance. It's actually kind of an Alpha Flight thing, I feel. When they win, the win is relatively definitive, at least seemingly, which just feels different from other comics. There isn't the big speech at the end. It just sort of okay, everything's back to normal. We move on. And this is certainly true when we're talking about the mystical interactions with the great beast and the like.
Yeah, if you defeat a great beast, that you beat the great beast. It's done. It's over.
Well, and also they almost present more of an assault on reality versus, fisticuffs with the master or something like that. So, but, to your point of how it feels much more showy with Doctor Strange, it's that's far less the case with Shaman and really, I mean, also with Snowbird to a certain degree.
Of all of the Alpha Flight members that we've met so far, the one that I am most interested in seeing brought to live action life is actually Shaman, because I think the way that he scatters the powder around and does his crisscross applesauce flying thing, I think there's a lot of really cool stuff that would look neat on screen with him in a way that others would feel a lot like stuff we've already seen before, So Shaman acknowledges that they won today, but they need to find out how Rannoch was released here and what his connection to Stang and the Skull is. So they will be heading 100 years into the past to solve the mystery. It's a bit of a leap on Shaman's part to get there, but Byrne clearly wanted to get us from where we are to where we're going next, and then the next arc can pick up there.
Before we wrap today, we wanted to read off and respond to a blog comment we received. Like we said, if you have questions, you can email us. You can also reply to our blog post on the whynotpod.com. But coming from George St. Louis, we have, I love this podcast. Thanks, dude. Even though you two are like the Dead Poet Society if you're geeks. I don't know what that means. I have questions. Anyway, I only have a few nitpicks. John Byrne spent a good deal of time in Calgary, Alberta. It's where he got his arts degree, and there's a lot more personal stuff he put in. For example, years ago, I was working in a video store in Calgary, and a girl came to the counter with the last name Twoyoungmen. I'm following your podcast and blog quite closely because I feel about Alpha Flight the way I feel about Kiss. I love Alpha Flight. I grew up with Alpha Flight. I hate Alpha Flight. I grew up with Alpha Flight. If you can explain how the Technomancer was able to override Madison's mutant power, I'll send you some maple syrup. Loving it. And George, thanks so much. And again, could you clarify the Dead Poet Society bit? Because I got questions and I don't want to dwell on the alternatives. So please let us know.
I'm going to assume it's a compliment and move about my day.
I think it's totally a compliment. I just want to know how.
I'm going to confess I've never seen Dead Poets Society. So, George, thank you again for your comment. And I'm sorry that your comment didn't post until now. I didn't realize that I had to manually approve those. So, damn it, George, I'm a podcaster, not a web guy. But as to the Technomancer, listeners, he's referring to a one-off villain that shows up in Alpha Flight number 63 during the Hudnall era. And he is able to send like a computer virus into machinery and take it over. And he takes over the box armor that is being operated by Madison Jeffries. We've met Madison Jeffries in the show. He's going to be much more important during the Matlow era. And his power is to transmutate metal and plastic and stuff around him into machinery and technology. And my explanation for this, George, my no prize for this, is that Madison Jeffries is physically interacting with the metal and reshaping it with his mutant power. His mutant power is a physical one that affects the matter around him. And when he phases into the box armor, which we never really get a good explanation about how that works, but I think that what we see during the whole later Mantlo era is that his brain functions as the software that operates that physical hardware that he is able to manipulate like putty. And so when the Technomancer gives this computer virus into the box armor, what it does is actually affects Madison's brain, which is why he's not able to like physically keep it out unless he can build some type of physical... I don't know. But anyway, that's why I think that the Technomancer was able to take him over, because he was working on software and Madison works in hardware. There we go.
Why Not is brought to you by the Excelsior Embroidery Company. Come check out the nearly 100 new items listed, including a full line of Halloween-themed towels and wall hangers. Get a jump on Christmas shopping with a variety of classic and cheeky designs. See these and more at excelsiorembroidery.etsy.com.
Why Not Read Alpha Flight is released every other week on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and at www.thewhynotpod.com, where you can find links to all our socials and maybe leave us a comment on the blog like George did. And now we are on YouTube, where you can listen to us while staring at our beautiful logo. Why Not is recorded in Chicago, Illinois, and deep beneath stately Baker Manor in a fashionable neighborhood outside St. Louis. It is produced and edited by Tom Flynn, with background cat noises provided by Teeny.
Join us next time as we head into the past for some Old North action. And Marina shows up in Louise Simonson's Power Pack book to help the kids deal with the Xanthian Boulder Crusher Sasquatch let loose last episode.
See you then!